The sound of splintering would echo across the yard as Karen's grandchildren burst through Marcus's shed door like tiny tornadoes. Within minutes, she was pounding on his front door, her manicured nails clicking against the glass, demanding access to his pool for the same children who'd just destroyed his property. But Karen had no idea that Marcus had been recording everything, or that her own dark secrets were about to surface in ways that would shatter her perfect suburban facade forever. Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, steam rising from his coffee mug as he watched the morning sun dance across his pristine backyard. The kidney-shaped pool sparkled like a blue jewel, surrounded by meticulously maintained landscaping that had taken him 3 years to perfect. After 25 years as a software engineer, early retirement at 52 felt like stepping into paradise. The tranquility shattered like glass. A thunderous crack split the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of wood splintering. Marcus's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips as he watched 2 children, a boy around 8 and a girl maybe 6, stumble through what had been the door of his storage shed. Broken planks hung at odd angles, the frame twisted beyond repair. "Holy hell," Marcus breathed, setting down his mug with trembling hands. The children looked around with wide eyes, as if surprised by their own destruction. The boy, stocky with dirt-smeared cheeks, held what appeared to be a baseball bat. The girl clutched a soccer ball, her blonde pigtails askew. "Tyler, Mom's gonna kill us," the girl whispered, loud enough for Marcus to hear through his open window. "Shut up, Emma. It's not our fault the stupid door was so weak," Tyler shot back, swinging the bat like a sword. "Besides, Grandma Karen says we can do whatever we want when we are visiting." Grandma Karen. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd heard about the infamous Karen Whitmore from other neighbors, how she'd moved in with her daughter Linda 3 months ago, turning the quiet cul-de-sac into a battleground of complaints and demands. But he'd managed to avoid any direct confrontations. Until now. Marcus grabbed his phone and stepped onto his back deck. "Hey, kids, what do you think you're doing?" Both children froze like deer in headlights. Tyler's grip tightened on the bat, while Emma took a step backward, bumping into the destroyed shed door. "We were just playing," Emma said, her voice small and uncertain. "Playing?" Marcus gestured at the wreckage. "You destroyed my shed door. That's not playing, that's vandalism." Tyler's face hardened with an expression far too mature for his age. "My grandma says you can't tell us what to do. She says this whole neighborhood belongs to everyone." "Your grandmother is wrong, son. This is my property, and you're trespassing. I need you both to go home right now, and I need to speak with your parents about the damage." "You can't make us." Tyler raised the bat slightly, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unsettling about the cold defiance in the boy's eyes. Before Marcus could respond, a shrill voice cut through the morning air like a siren. "Tyler, Emma, where are you?" The voice grew closer, and Marcus watched as a woman in her mid-60s emerged from the hedge that separated his property from the Hendersons next door. Karen Whitmore was exactly what he'd imagined. Bottle blonde hair sprayed into a helmet-like shell, oversized sunglasses despite the early hour, and a pink velour tracksuit that screamed entitlement. "There you are." Karen's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper but carried clearly across the yard. "I told you to stay close to Grandma." "The door broke," Emma said, pointing at the destruction. Karen's head snapped toward Marcus, and even behind her sunglasses, he could feel her gaze burning into him. She marched across his lawn as if she owned it, her white sneakers leaving dark impressions in the dew-dampened grass. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Karen Whitmore, Linda's mother. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Marcus remained on his deck, maintaining the higher ground. "Marcus Chen. And your grandchildren just destroyed my shed door." Karen glanced at the wreckage with the casual indifference of someone examining a slightly wilted flower. "Oh, that old thing. It looks like it was falling apart anyway. These old structures can be so unsafe. Probably a good thing it came down before someone got hurt." The audacity hit Marcus like a physical blow. Unsafe. It was perfectly fine until your grandchildren took a baseball bat to it. Now, there's no need to raise your voice. Karen's tone remained saccharine, but there was steel underneath. Children will be children. Boys especially need room to play and explore. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice your lovely pool. Marcus felt the conversation shifting in a direction he didn't like. What about it? Well, it's such a hot day. Already, and the children have been cooped up inside for so long. I'm sure you wouldn't mind if they took a quick dip, just to cool off after all this excitement. The request, no, the demand disguised as a request, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus stared at Karen, wondering if he'd heard correctly. You want me to let your grandchildren use my pool? The same children who just destroyed my property. Karen's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind her sunglasses. I think that would be the neighborly thing to do. After all, we are all part of this community. Sharing is caring, don't you think? No, Marcus said flatly. I don't think that at all. Your grandchildren are not welcome in my pool, on my property, or anywhere near me until their parents pay for the damage they've caused. The mask slipped. Karen's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl that transformed her face into something ugly and sharp. Excuse me, did you just refuse a simple request from a neighbor? I refused an unreasonable demand from someone whose grandchildren just vandalized my property. Vandalized. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. They are children. And that shed was clearly a safety hazard. You should be thanking us for taking care of it before someone got seriously injured. Marcus pulled out his phone and held it up. I'm calling the police. The police? Karen laughed, but there was no humor in it. Over a broken door? Do you know how ridiculous you'll sound? Property damage is property damage, regardless of the age of the perpetrators. Their parents are responsible. Don't you dare threaten my family. Karen stepped closer to the deck, her face flushed with rage. I know exactly what kind of man you are. Selfish, antisocial, probably some kind of creep who doesn't like children. That's why you live alone, isn't it? No normal person builds a fence this high unless they're hiding something. The personal attack hit harder than Marcus expected. He'd built the privacy fence precisely because he valued his solitude, not because he was hiding anything. But Karen's insinuation felt like a violation. Get off my property, he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. Take your grandchildren and get off my property right now. Or what? Karen crossed her arms, planting herself more firmly on his lawn. You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'll tell them about the threatening way you spoke to children. I'll tell them about your creepy behavior and your obvious disregard for community values. Tyler had been watching the exchange with fascination, still gripping his baseball bat. Now he stepped forward, emboldened by his grandmother's aggression. Yeah, you can't tell us what to do. Grandma Karen says mean people like you are why the world is so messed up. Emma, meanwhile, had wandered closer to the pool, her soccer ball forgotten. Grandma, can we swim now? The water looks really nice. Of course, sweetheart, Karen said, her voice shifting back to syrupy sweetness when addressing her granddaughter. I'm sure this nice man is going to let you use his pool. Aren't you? She turned back to Marcus with a smile that was pure venom. Marcus felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. These people were acting as if basic property rights didn't exist, as if his refusal to accommodate them was some kind of moral failing. He'd encountered entitled behavior before, but nothing quite like this. No, he said again, pulling out his phone. I'm calling the police right now. Wait. Karen's voice cracked like a whip. Before you make a mistake, you'll regret. Let me make something crystal clear. I've been living in this neighborhood for 3 months, and I've already established myself with the community association, the local PDA, even the city council. I volunteer at the library and coordinate the neighborhood watch program. Do you know what that means? Marcus paused, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. It means, Karen continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than her earlier shouts, that when I tell people about your antisocial behavior, your refusal to integrate with the community, your hostile attitude toward children, people will listen. And believe me, I have a very compelling way of telling stories. The threat was clear, even wrapped in Karen's pseudo-reasonable tone. She was offering him a choice: comply with her demands or face social warfare. Marcus looked at Tyler, who was now using his bat to poke at the broken shed door, causing more damage. He looked at Emma, who had somehow moved even closer to his pool despite his explicit instructions to stay away. He looked at Karen, standing on his lawn like a conquering general surveying captured territory. And then he looked at his phone, where the camera app was still open from earlier that morning when he'd been taking pic. Marcus spent the afternoon reinforcing his shed door with a temporary plywood barrier, his hands working mechanically while his mind churned through possible scenarios. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the Henderson house, expecting to see Karen's blonde helmet of hair bobbing over the fence line, but the neighboring yard remained suspiciously quiet. Too quiet. By evening, he'd almost convinced himself that maybe his recording had been enough to end things. Maybe Karen had retreated to lick her wounds and would handle the situation through proper channels. Maybe rational adults could resolve this like civilized human beings. He should have known better. The first sign of trouble came at 7:43 p.m. Just as Marcus was settling down with a beer and his laptop on the back deck. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Linda Henderson, Karen's daughter. We need to talk about what happened today. Can you come over?" Marcus stared at the message. Linda Henderson had always seemed reasonable, a quiet woman who worked as a nurse and kept to herself. He'd waved to her a few times but had never had a real conversation. If anyone could rein in Karen's behavior, it would be her own daughter. He typed back, "I'd prefer to discuss this over the phone first. You can call me." The response came immediately, "Face to face would be better. Please. It's important." Something in the phrasing made Marcus hesitate. Linda had never struck him as the type to demand in-person meetings with neighbors she barely knew. But then again, having Karen as a mother might drive anyone to desperate measures. Against his better judgment, Marcus grabbed his phone, with the morning's recording still safely stored, and walked across his yard toward the Hendersons' back gate. Linda met him at the gate, but she wasn't alone. Karen stood behind her, arms crossed and wearing a different outfit, a sensible blue cardigan over slacks that made her look like someone's kindly grandmother instead of the suburban terrorist from that morning. "Thank you for coming, Linda," said, her voice strained. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus kept his distance, standing just outside the gate. "The only misunderstanding is your mother thinking she can demand access to my pool after her grandchildren destroyed my property." About that, Karen interjected, her voice now soft and reasonable, a complete 180 from her morning persona. "I may have gotten a bit emotional earlier. You have to understand, I'm very protective of Tyler and Emma. They've been through so much with the divorce." "Mom," Linda said quietly, a warning in her voice. But Karen continued as if she hadn't heard. "What I'm trying to say is, perhaps we both overreacted. I'd like to make this right." Marcus felt like he was talking to a completely different person. Gone was the entitled harridan who had threatened him with social warfare. In her place stood a concerned grandmother whose only crime was loving her grandchildren too much. "I'm willing to pay for the shed door," Karen continued. "Cash. No insurance claims, no paperwork. Just neighbors helping neighbors fix a little accident." A little accident. Marcus couldn't keep the incredulity out of his voice. "Your grandson took a baseball bat to my shed. Boys will be boys," Karen said with a gentle laugh that sounded nothing like the harsh cackle from that morning. "I'm sure you were quite the adventurer yourself at that age." Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus, my mother feels terrible about the whole thing. She's offering to pay for damages and make sure the children understand boundaries better. Isn't that enough?" Marcus looked between the two women, trying to reconcile this reasonable conversation with the confrontation he'd recorded. If he hadn't captured Karen's threats on video, he might have started doubting his own memory. "What about the pool?" he asked. "What about it?" Karen's expression was picture of innocence. "This morning you demanded that I let your grandchildren use it. You threatened to destroy my reputation in the neighborhood when I refused." Karen blinked slowly, then looked at Linda with an expression of such confused hurt that it was almost convincing. "Honey, I have no idea what he's talking about. I simply asked if the children might be able to swim sometime, if he ever wanted company. I certainly never made any demands." "That's not what happened," Marcus said flatly. Perhaps you misunderstood her tone, Linda suggested diplomatically. Mom's from New York. Sometimes her directness comes across as more aggressive than she intends. Marcus stared at them both, realizing what was happening. Karen was rewriting history in real time, and her daughter was either complicit or genuinely believed her mother's version of events. Without witnesses, it became his word against theirs, and Karen had positioned herself as the reasonable grandmother while painting him as the hostile neighbor who overreacted to children playing. I have the entire conversation recorded, Marcus said. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Linda's eyes widened, while Karen's face went carefully blank. You recorded us? Linda asked. Without permission. I was on my own property documenting vandalism. I'm legally allowed to record anything that happens on my land. That's... Linda struggled for words. That seems excessive. And invasive. Why would you record a grandmother talking to her grandchildren? Karen had remained silent during this exchange, but Marcus caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She was enjoying watching her daughter do the heavy lifting of making him look bad. Because your mother was making threats and demands, Marcus said. The recording proves exactly what kind of conversation this was. Threats. Karen finally spoke, her voice quavering with what sounded like genuine hurt. Marcus, I'm a 64-year-old retired librarian. What kind of threats could I possibly make? Linda put a protective arm around her mother's shoulders. Mom, you don't have to justify yourself. Marcus, I think you've mischaracterized this entire situation. My mother is offering to pay for accidental damage caused by children playing, and you're treating her like some kind of criminal. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Somehow, he'd become the aggressor in this narrative. Karen's masterful performance was turning him into the unreasonable neighbor who secretly recorded innocent conversations and harbored suspicious hostility toward children and elderly women. Play the recording, Karen said suddenly. I have nothing to hide. Marcus hesitated. Something about her confidence made him uneasy, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Right now? Linda asked. Why not? Karen's voice grew stronger, more confident. Let's clear the air once and for all. If I said something inappropriate, I'll apologize. If I didn't. She left the implication hanging. Marcus pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the recording file. Every instinct told him this was a trap, but he couldn't see the mechanism. The recording was crystal clear, Karen's threats, her demands, her children's destruction of his property. The evidence was ironclad. He pressed play. Perfectly fine until your grandchildren took a baseball bat to it. His own voice came through clearly, followed by Karen's response, now, there's no need to raise your voice. Children will be children. Marcus frowned. The audio was right, but something was off. Karen's tone sounded much more reasonable than he remembered, less demanding and more conversational. Boys especially need room to play and explore. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice your lovely pool. Again, Karen's voice carried none of the entitlement he remembered. She sounded like a grandmother making small talk, not issuing demands. Well, it's such a hot day already, and the children have been cooped up inside for so long. I'm sure you wouldn't mind if they took a quick dip. Just to cool off after all this excitement. Marcus's stomach dropped. Even to his own ears, Karen's request sounded perfectly reasonable, a polite inquiry, not a demand. His own response came through harsh and aggressive by comparison. You want me to let your grandchildren use my pool? The same children who just destroyed my property. Linda winced at the hostility in his voice. The recording continued, but Marcus found himself hearing it differently. Without the visual context, Karen's body language, her predatory smile, the menace behind her sunglasses, the conversation sounded like a reasonable grandmother being rejected by an antisocial neighbor who was making mountains out of molehills. Even Karen's final threat came across as the words of a woman defending her family against an unreasonably hostile man. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. When the recording ended, silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Oh, Marcus," Linda said softly, and there was genuine pity in her voice. "I had no idea you felt so threatened by my mother asking if the kids could swim sometime." "That's not..." Marcus started, then stopped. How could he explain the menace he'd felt in Karen's presence? How could he describe the calculating coldness behind her sunglasses? The audio captured words but not intent, tone but not context. "I think I understand now," Karen said gently, and Marcus heard forgiveness in her voice, the kind reserved for troubled souls who needed guidance back to civility. "You're not used to having neighbors, are you? Living alone for so long, maybe. You've forgotten how families interact. The chaos of children playing can seem overwhelming when you're not accustomed to it." Marcus stared at her, recognizing a master at work. Karen had somehow managed to use his own evidence against him, turning his reasonable boundaries into antisocial behavior and her aunt. Marcus spent the night dissecting Karen's performance like a coder debugging malicious software. Every conversation, every gesture, every carefully chosen word, he replayed it all, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. By dawn, he had filled 3 pages of a legal pad with notes, timelines, and questions that needed answers. The most glaring discrepancy was the text message. Karen had supposedly learned about Tyler's emotional distress during their evening conversation with Linda. Yet she'd sent the guilt-inducing message 20 minutes before they'd even spoken. Either she was psychic, or she was orchestrating a much more elaborate deception than a simple property damage dispute. Marcus made his first call at 8 a.m. sharp. Henderson residence, Linda's tired voice answered. "Linda, this is Marcus. I wanted to ask you something about last night." "Oh." Her tone immediately became guarded. "What about it? When did Tyler start crying about the shed? Your mother mentioned he'd been upset all evening." There was a long pause. "So what do you mean?" "Your mother sent me a text saying Tyler had been crying about the damage and needed forgiveness to heal. I was just wondering when that started." Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus, Tyler and Emma went to their father's house yesterday afternoon. They weren't even here last evening." The line went quiet except for the sound of Linda's breathing as the implication sank in. "Linda," Marcus said gently, "I think we need to talk. Without your mother present." 2 hours later, Linda sat across from Marcus at a corner table in Brewster's Coffee, her hands wrapped around a mug like it was an anchor. Without Karen's presence, she looked smaller, more fragile, like someone who'd been carrying a weight. For so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "How long has this been going on?" Marcus asked. Linda stared into her coffee. "The lying? The manipulation? Or just the general chaos that follows my mother wherever she goes?" "All of it." Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you want the short version or the version that starts with my childhood and explains why I'm a 42-year-old woman who still can't say no to her mother?" "Whatever you're comfortable sharing." Linda took a sip of coffee, then another, as if fortifying herself for a difficult confession. "My mother has been a managing reality for as long as I can remember. When I was little, I thought everyone's mother could make problems disappear just by telling a different version of what happened. It wasn't until I got married that I realized other people's mothers didn't systematically gaslight entire communities." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Back in Connecticut, Mom lived in a senior community. Beautiful place, very exclusive. She'd been there about 2 years when complaints started coming in. Nothing major at first, she was just a little demanding, a little entitled. But then things escalated." Linda paused, her fingers tightening around her mug. "There was an incident with the community pool. Mom decided the pool hours were inconvenient and started bringing guests during residents-only time. When the management company asked her to stop, she organized a petition claiming they were discriminating against seniors who had mobility issues and needed off-peak hours." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "She got 3 board members removed from their positions. Convinced half the community that the management company was ageist and probably embezzling funds. It took 8 months and 2 lawsuits before the truth came out, but by then, Mom had moved on to her next target, the woman who ran the community garden." "Jesus." Mom wanted a bigger plot, but there was a waiting list. So she started spreading rumors about the woman playing favorites, maybe skimming money from the garden club treasury. She was so convincing that other residents started investigating, demanding audits, forming committees. The woman ended up having a nervous breakdown and had to resign from all her volunteer positions. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing the scope of what Linda was describing. How many people? In 2 years. She systematically went after 11 different people. The pool manager, the garden coordinator, 3 board members, 2 maintenance supervisors, a nurse from the on-site medical center, and a few residents who had the audacity to oppose her on various issues. What kind of issues? Linda's smile was bitter. Pet policies, noise ordinances, holiday decorations, visitor parking, anything that inconvenienced her personally became a community crisis that required immediate reform. And she was brilliant at it. She'd identify each person's vulnerabilities and attack them in ways that seemed reasonable on the surface. Marcus thought about Karen's performance the night before, how she'd used his own recording against him, how she'd positioned herself as the concerned grandmother while painting him as antisocial and hostile. Why did she move in with you? Because the residents finally figured out what she was doing. A few of the people she targeted got together and hired a lawyer. They were building a harassment case, gathering testimony, documenting her pattern of behavior. The senior community was preparing to evict her when she suddenly decided that Connecticut was too cold and she missed being close to family. She ran away. She made a strategic retreat, Linda corrected. There's a difference. Mom never loses, she just changes battlefields. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Linda the timestamp on Karen's text. Like this. Linda read the message, her face growing pale as she saw the timestamp. She sent this before we even talked to you. She was already planning the guilt manipulation while she was standing in my kitchen, putting on her reasonable grandmother performance. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are Tyler and Emma actually your mother's grandchildren? Linda's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. What kind of question is that? Just are they? Of course they are, Linda stopped, her eyes widening. Oh my God. You think she's using random children as props for her manipulations? I'm just trying to understand the timeline. You said they went to their father's house yesterday afternoon, but your mother was using them to justify her behavior all morning. No, they are definitely my kids. But Linda set down her mug with a shaking hand. But Mom always seems to have them around when she needs them for something. Soccer games that need carpools, school events that require volunteer coordination. Playdates that happen to involve families she wants to get close to. She's weaponizing your children. Linda's face crumpled. I've been so focused on keeping the peace, on not making waves, that I never stopped to think about what I was teaching. Tyler and Emma. They've watched her manipulate entire communities and get rewarded for it. What kind of adults am I raising? Marcus reached across the table and touched her hand gently. The kind who can recognize the problem and do something about it. That's more than most people manage. Linda wiped her eyes with her free hand. I don't know how to stop her. She's been doing this my entire life, and I've never seen anyone successfully stand up to her. She's too smart, too good at reading people and finding their weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses, Marcus said. Including your mother. Like what? Marcus pulled out his legal pad and flipped to a page covered in notes. She's overconfident. Last night, she got so caught up in her performance that she made tactical errors. The text message was just the beginning. He showed Linda his timeline. Look at this. She threatened me with social warfare, then tried to reframe the entire confrontation as a misunderstanding. But she couldn't resist taking one more shot, telling you she'd keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't cause trouble. She was so pleased with how she'd manipulated the situation that she revealed her true intentions. Linda studied the notes. You think like a programmer. Because that's what this is, she's running a social engineering program, and like any program, it has exploitable vulnerabilities. She relies on people not comparing notes, not questioning her version of events, not documenting her behavior. So what do we do? Marcus flipped to a fresh page in his legal pad. We start gathering data. Real documentation, not just anecdotal evidence. If your mother has been doing this for years, there's going to be a trail. Court records from Connecticut. Complaints filed with community associations, maybe even criminal charges if she went too far. You want to investigate my mother. I want to protect this neighborhood from becoming her next hunting ground. And Linda. Marcus met her eyes. I want to help you get your life back. Linda stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something he hadn't expected: relief. The relief of someone who'd been carrying a secret burden for so long that she'd forgotten it was possible to share the weight. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. What? Mom didn't just move here to escape the situation in Connecticut. She chose this neighborhood specifically. Linda pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a screenshot of a real estate listing. She spent 3 months researching demographics, property values, community association structures. She told me she wanted to find somewhere with potential. Potential for what? That's what I was afraid to ask. Marcus studied the listing, a detailed breakdown of their neighborhood's amenities, demographics, and community leadership structure. Someone had done extensive homework before making this their target. Within 6 hours of leaving the coffee shop, Marcus's doorbell had rung 14 times. Each visitor arrived with the same manufactured concern, the same rehearsed talking points, and the same underlying message: the neighborhood was worried about his adjustment issues and wanted to help him become a better community member. Janet from 3 houses down brought homemade cookies and a pamphlet about building healthy neighborhood relationships. Bob from the corner house offered to help Marcus understand family dynamics and suggested he might benefit from anger management resources. Mrs. Patterson from across the street wondered if Marcus might be more comfortable in a different neighborhood, perhaps. Something with more privacy, less interaction with children. Each conversation followed Karen's script so precisely that Marcus began taking notes on the repetitive phrasing: community integration, concerning behavior, children's safety, and neighborhood harmony. By the 7th visitor, he could predict their next sentence before they spoke. But it was the 8th visitor who made Marcus realize how thoroughly Karen had weaponized his neighbors. Dr. Chen. The woman at his door was younger than the others, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. I'm Sarah Martinez. I live 2 blocks over, and I'm also a family therapist. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Let me guess, Karen sent you. Actually, several neighbors reached out to me. They are concerned about some recent incidents involving children and wanted professional guidance on how to approach the situation sensitively. And what exactly did these neighbors tell you? Sarah consulted a small notebook. That there was an altercation involving children playing in your yard, that you became very aggressive with an elderly grandmother, and that you're struggling to adapt to living in a family-oriented neighborhood. Marcus stared at her. That's what they said happened. With some variations, but the core story was consistent. Marcus, I want you to know that everyone I spoke with genuinely wants to help. No one's trying to ostracize you or make you feel unwelcome. Sometimes when people live alone for extended periods, social situations can feel overwhelming. The professional compassion in her voice was almost worse than outright hostility. Karen had somehow convinced a licensed therapist that Marcus was the problem, a socially maladjusted man who needed intervention before his antisocial behavior escalated. Did anyone mention that the children destroyed my property? Sarah's expression shifted slightly. I heard there was some minor accidental damage. Old sheds can be fragile, and children don't always understand property boundaries. Minor accidental damage. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken of the splintered shed door. Does this look accidental to you? Sarah studied the images, her professional composure wavering. This is more extensive than I was led to believe. Did anyone mention that Karen demanded I let these same children use my pool immediately after they caused this damage? Or that she threatened to destroy my reputation in the neighborhood when I refused? No, Sarah looked genuinely confused. That doesn't match any of the accounts I received. Marcus showed her the timeline he'd developed, the inconsistencies in Karen's story, the pattern of manipulation he'd uncovered. With each piece of evidence, Sarah's expression grew more troubled. Dr. Chen, I think I may have been given incomplete information. You've been weaponized, Marcus said bluntly. Karen Whitmore is a serial manipulator who targets individuals and then uses community pressure to isolate them. You're not the first professional she's recruited to validate her narrative. Sarah sat down heavily on his porch steps, her notebook. Forgotten. Oh God. I recommended that the neighborhood association consider mediation services. I told them this kind of conflict could escalate and suggested they might want to document concerning behaviors. You gave Karen exactly what she needed, professional validation for treating me like a community threat. I need to make some phone calls, Sarah said, standing abruptly. This is completely outside my ethical guidelines. I never should have accepted second-hand information about a situation without hearing from all parties involved. As Sarah hurried away, Marcus's phone rang. Linda's voice was tight with panic. They are having a meeting. Right now, in the community center. Karen called an emergency session about recent safety concerns in the neighborhood. How many people? I'm looking through the window, maybe 30 families. Marcus, she's got sign-up sheets for something. And there's a man I don't recognize taking notes. I'll be right there. Marcus grabbed his legal pad and the folder of evidence he'd been compiling, but as he reached for his car keys, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Marcus, this is Dave from the Neighborhood Association. We are having a community meeting about recent incidents. Your presence would be appreciated but not required. We want to handle this sensitively. The message was polite, even diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. They were discussing him whether he attended or not. Karen had maneuvered him into a lose-lose situation: show up and face a room full of people primed to see him as the problem, or stay away and let Karen control the narrative completely. Marcus chose to fight. The community center buzzed with conversation when he arrived, but the room fell silent the moment he walked through the door. 30-some faces turned toward him with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright suspicion. Karen stood at the front of the room next to a flip chart covered with bullet points, looking every inch the concerned community leader. Marcus. Her voice carried perfectly pitched surprise and warmth. I'm so glad you decided to join us. We were just discussing ways to strengthen our neighborhood community. The man Linda had mentioned sat in the front row, mid-50s, suit and tie, with a briefcase and official-looking form spread across the table in front of him. He stood as Marcus entered. Mr. Chen. I'm Tom Bradley from the county's Community Mediation Services. Several residents requested professional guidance for addressing neighbor disputes constructively. Marcus shook the man's hand while scanning the room. He recognized most faces from Karen's recruitment campaign: Janet, Bob, Mrs. Patterson, and a dozen others who'd visited his door with cookies and concern. Linda sat in the back corner, looking miserable. Sarah Martinez was nowhere to be seen. What exactly has been discussed so far? Marcus asked. Tom consulted his notes. We've been talking about establishing clearer community guidelines for property maintenance, noise levels, and child-friendly spaces. Mrs. Whitmore has outlined some concerning patterns that suggest we might benefit from more structured conflict resolution processes. What patterns? Karen stepped forward with a sad smile. Marcus, I know this is difficult for you. Change always is. But several neighbors have expressed concerns about hostile behavior toward children and elderly residents. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus realized that Karen had primed every person present with her version of events. He was the antisocial neighbor who needed intervention, and she was the concerned community leader trying to help him integrate. I'd like to address those concerns, Marcus said, pulling out his folder. But first, I think everyone should hear the actual recording of what happened yesterday morning. The room tensed. Karen's smile flickered but held. That seems unnecessarily confrontational, Tom said diplomatically. Perhaps we could focus on moving forward constructively rather than relitigating past incidents. I think the community deserves to hear what actually happened before deciding how to move forward. Marcus pulled out his phone, but before he could access the recording, Karen spoke up. Of course, everyone should hear it. I have nothing to hide. She looked directly at him, her eyes bright with confidence. Play it, Marcus. Let everyone hear how I politely asked if the children could swim sometime and how you responded. The same trap as before. Marcus realized that Karen had counted on him playing the recording in this setting, where the audio without visual context would make him sound like the aggressor to a room full of people already primed to see him as the problem. But Marcus had spent 2 days debugging Karen's manipulation program, and he'd found more than one exploitable vulnerability. Actually, he said, I think we should start with something else. He pulled out a printed timeline and handed copies to Tom and several neighbors. This documents when each of you was contacted by Mrs. Whitmore, what specific information you were given, and how that information differs from the documented facts. Karen's smile faltered as people began reading. For instance, Marcus continued, Mrs. Whitmore told several of you that my shed door was rotting and dangerous. But the damage photos clearly show fresh wood splintering from impact. She told others that I became aggressive with children, but the recording shows I spoke directly to the children exactly twice, once to ask what they were doing, and once to tell them to go home. He pulled out another sheet. She also told Janet that I refused to speak with their parents about the damage, but I never spoke to any parents because none were present. She told Bob that I have a history of conflict with neighbors, but I've lived here 3 years without a single complaint or incident. The mood in the room was shifting as people compared notes and realized their information didn't match. Most important,